Hey guys, welcome back, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Remington R51. I'm Phil Houston, and this is the Backyard Ring. Okay guys, so here it is, the Remington R51. This is a Gen 2. This is one of those guns that I bought just because it had the kind of the nostalgics to go along with it. This gun was designed back in 1917, I believe, and produced from 1918 until 1927, and then it pretty much disappeared for about 90 years. There were some reports that there were a few of them that were probably manufactured back in the 30s. That production run was pretty small, from my understanding, but 2014 Remington decided to bring this thing back to life, and we call that the Gen 1. So it was the re-release, and it was so unreliable that Remington actually recalled them all. They took a couple of years and redesigned it and released Gen 2. Now, even with the Gen 2, my understanding is they still had some bugs they still needed to work out, and it seems that they have worked them out. So I really didn't care whether or not I tore this thing up while I was doing the review. It was more or less to prove whether or not this thing was a reliable firearm. So I took it straight out of the box. I haven't even taken the slide off, and I ran about 100 and somewhere between 150 and 200 rounds through it. I know we ran 80 rounds of Winchester white box, and we ran 50 rounds of Armscore USA. We ran 21 rounds of just some hand loads, and then just a few rounds here and there of some various ammo. And I did not have any failures to eject. I did not have any failures to feed. There's only one quirk that this gun had, and it had to do with a loaded magazine. If the magazine was fully loaded and you pushed it in, it didn't always lock in. So you can see right here, it's not completely locked in, and it would seem like the magazine was all the way in when it was under pressure, but it wouldn't be, and when you draw the slide back, it wouldn't grab the round. So I did that about 3 times in the dark, just fumbling around, and I did it again while we were out on the range today, and it was light outside. I could see what was going on, and it had enough play in here that I could tell that that's what the problem was. And it kind of got the gun into a weird jam. And we'll take it apart, and I'll kind of show you what I think happened. But it was entirely user error. Normally, I put it in a new mag, I smacked the bottom. I didn't do that, and it didn't quite seat all the way. But because there is a floating breech block in here, it got into a weird kind of bind. Number one, it had absolutely no lubrication in it whatsoever. So when we took it out, we ran all of our ammunition through it. I brought it inside, and I'll post a clip here of when I disassembled it. And you can see that this thing was just completely just bone dry. The gunpowder residue that was inside of it was very powdery still, and there was no lubrication in it whatsoever. So that definitely didn't help the situation. But once the round was chambered, it fed just fine. I had one hesitation, again due to no lubrication, where when it was fired, it came all the way back. It hesitated for a second before it chambered the next round, but it did do it on its own. I didn't have to touch it, and again, no lubrication in it. It still chambered the round just fine, still ejected the previous round just fine, and finished out that magazine. And then we were probably at least 100 rounds into it before that happened, and it never happened again. So it could have possibly been a weak load, but I think it had more to do with the fact that there was no lubrication in the gun. But that being said, I've seen so many horrible reviews on this gun that I wanted to see for myself what it was going to do out of the box without doing anything to it, and pretty much the worst possible scenario. So it did an excellent job. It was a very good shooting gun. Didn't have a lot of muzzle lift to it like you would see in one of today's standard type pistols with a guide rod and a tilting barrel. And we'll take a look at one here. I wanted to do a size comparison anyway. So this is a Smith & Wesson 380 EZ. It's the same size as the 9mm EZ. I just don't have a 9mm here, but they're almost exactly the same size. In fact, I think the R51 is actually a little bit shorter, just a hair shorter in the grip, but it is plenty enough for me. In fact, my finger is above the magazine here where it curves out, and it's just it feels really good in the hand. Another important thing to point out here is that this is a solid metal frame. This is not polymer. This is aluminum and steel slide, and then a little bit of a plastic insert here. And the plastic insert in the grip and the trigger is really the only plastic I see on this gun. It's very well made. Everything fits just right. It's got a very large grip safety. It's very similar to the one that's here on the 380, only this one sits flush. I mean, just the lines in it are just perfect. It just sits in there nice and flat. There's no irritation to your hand. Yeah, for the time period, you can see some things that were stolen from the 1911. Our texturing here in the front of the grip, the very similar beaver tail style grip safety goes all the way up on the butt of the gun here. But a very, very generous slide release and protection for your hand. Make sure you don't get some bite there. So we're not going to do a cleaning on it. I've already done the cleaning. I've done the inspection on it after we ran the rounds through it. I wanted to make sure this thing was still in good working order. But for the purpose of the video here, I want to kind of show you the difference between this gun and what we would normally see today in as far as semi-automatic pistols. This is a very unique gas system in here, or recoil system here. This is a Peterson hesitation lock, I believe is what it's called. This is the only gun I've ever seen it in, and this is actually one of the things that drew me to the firearm. Let's take it apart here real quick, and we can show you some of the differences in here. So take it apart here. We're going to line this pin here up with that notch. I'm going to kind of wiggle this slide release out here. It's not the most user-friendly thing to take apart. This is the serration here is for you to grab a hold of it. Grab a hold of the barrel, slide it off, and then we have a floating breech block in here. Just kind of pop this thing out here. Now, I'm not going to do the complete disassembly here, but this bushing here it's keyed Hopefully you guys can see that in there. There's a little notch out on both sides. You need to try to line this bushing up with the slot in here in order to get this bushing out. You do have to release the barrel and kind of push that bushing down with your thumb and pry it up a little bit in order to get the barrel out. There's not enough room to get it out unless you do that. But I just wanted you guys to see kind of what it looks like on the inside. I'd had some reports or some reviews that had stated that this was a striker fired gun, and it absolutely is not. Get this thing back down here where it belongs. Like I said, it's not the most user-friendly thing in the world to do a disassembly on. If we take a look, this is a hammer. So this is not a striker fire assembly. This is just a floating breech block, and it is hammer fired. Here's your pin on the back side, and we probably can't even see that. Gotta take this thing out again. You can see it pop out the front here. So, very unique design. Something different. Something, again, invented more than 100 years ago. Do a reassembly here. You kind of work this just a little bit to get it in there. And you're just going to pull it back. You have to forgive me, I had to land this thing apart one time. Trying to catch our spring. That thing has to be just right. I'll test it out for functionality here. Make sure it doesn't lock back on us. The magazine in. Make sure it grabs like it's supposed to. Slide lock works. Alright, so in contrast, if we disassemble our Smith & Wesson here, we have a fixed breech block, a captured spring assembly here, or a guide rod, and then our barrel just kind of slides out. It's a much easier design to disassemble. And then we've got our firing pin back there, and this is also a hammer fired gun. So there's our hammer. So a very different design. It's unique. It's very different from what we're used to, but it was very reliable. I did not expect that. I expected to have a ton of failures, especially after taking it out of the box and not doing a cleaning, not giving it any oil, and it just ran. Magazine after magazine after magazine, and we had one hesitation. We had 2 instances where I didn't get the magazine fully seated, but for $200 I was pleasantly surprised. I do love the fact that they stayed with a aluminum frame on it. I like the metal frame. In fact, I have another Remington. Here, the RM380 also has the same basic styling to it. It's the same basic disassembly. You line your pin up with the hole, pin comes out. Also a hammer fired gun, but we have a hammer we can see on this one. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and run some footage here of the shooting at the range, and we'll come back and we'll sum it up here. Alright, so we got the Remington R51 out here. We got some magazines loaded with some Armscore USA. And then we have some Winchester white box that we're going to be trying here in a few minutes. Now we've already run 14 rounds of the Winchester white box. We've run approximately 14 rounds of some other ammunition. For the purpose of the video, we're going to run 14 more of each and see how it runs. We're about 14 yards. It gets a swing and it's hard to hit. Okay, so now we are loaded up with some Winchester white box. I'll poke back. I'm going to give this a try. This problem is, well, the magazine went all the way in. Popped out again. There we go. That's different. Whatever, it's because the striker was already. Alright. That was an odd little problem there. I think the magazine didn't catch properly and therefore wasn't feeding. But when I did smack the magazine in there, it seemed like it had something trying to prevent it from me pulling the slide back. That's the first time that's happened. So let's try another magazine. And I'm wondering if it's not because the striker was already set. Possibility. Let's try again. That time seemed to run just fine. Let's try that again. I don't seem to run just fine. release the slide on its own. That's it. Strike another magazine with that arm score. Alright, arm score for auto attack. Pretty good. It's getting warm. Okay guys, I just wanted you to see this. We ran 200 rounds through this thing and really no malfunctions. I mean, the only malfunction that we really had was the magazine didn't stay in the bottom of the mag well. This thing is bone dry, and it ran pretty much flawlessly. So this thing actually came with an additional magazine, so it did come with 2 magazines. I've seen some less expensive guns only coming with 1 nowadays, which is kind of nice. I went ahead and ordered 3 more magazines and then a crimson trace laser that will engage when you grip the gun. It kind of wraps around the trigger guard here, laser in the front. And I think that was kind of a neat little option. You can order this gun with a crimson trace laser already on it, and it comes in, I think this one is somewhere around $450, $500 MSRP, and I think it's about $650 with a laser on it. Crimson trace lasers aren't, they're not cheap. It's a nice little additive. My final thoughts on it, it's a nice little piece of history. Yeah, it is 9mm plus P. It's a very durable little gun. The magazine not seating properly, that's not unusual. I have a lot of guns here in the safe that you have to give it a good smack. I just wasn't paying attention when I was using it. It just seemed to slide right in. Felt like it caught, but it really didn't. So that's a bad on my part. It's not the gun's fault. That being said, I mean, it was reliable, but the weird jam that we had in it because of that floating breech block inside, it's the one thing that I would say I would definitely not recommend for conceal and carry, especially if you're not carrying it chambered. So if you go to rack the slide and it doesn't grab that round and chamber like it's supposed to, this magazine isn't seated in all the way, gets into that weird bind where I couldn't rack the slide, you're dead. So because of that, I wouldn't recommend it as a carry piece, but it is a very unique and seemingly high quality little firearm. I mean, how often do you see a metal frame and this kind of build quality? I think I picked this up for 199 bucks. I mean, that is just, it's unreal. I'm sure that part of that pricing had to do with the failures that I had before. But as far as I can tell, Remington did an excellent job of fixing all the problems. I think a lot of the problems originally had to do with this little notch here in the front of the magazine. kind of holding the tip of the rounds down, and maybe something to do with the feed lips. And I think a few people had said that the magazine springs were a little stiff, which definitely could have attributed to some of the problems that I saw. But it all seems to be worked out now, at least with the one that I have. So I can't complain. I stick rounds in it as long as they chamber. They just continually run. I'd like to get this thing out on the range after we've cleaned it and put a generous amount of oil inside of it. It's kind of leaking out of every hole here right now. I was really impressed. I really was. I probably saw 50 videos out there on YouTube saying how unreliable this gun was. And to get it, pull it straight out of the box with no lubrication whatsoever, run 150 rounds through it without any problems at all, I was very surprised. So hats off to Remington for the redesign. So I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll see you next time here at the Backyard Range.